All right, so get this. Today we are diving into a true crime story that is, well, pretty messed up. It's about this couple, Linda and Paul Curry. And honestly, their story is like a giant warning sign.
It really makes you think, about how we never really know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how well can you ever really know someone?
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll be using the 48 Hours episode to catch a genius, to try and untangle this whole crazy situation.
Sounds like a fascinating case.
Oh, it is. What got me, though, wasn't so much who did it, but how much Linda trusted Paul, even when her friends were like, girl, run.
That's something we see a lot, sadly, in these kinds of cases where there's manipulation, there's often this blind trust from the victim, like they're under a spell or something. Makes
Huh.
it so hard to see what's really happening.
Yeah, it's like they're too close to the situation to see the whole picture. So let's rewind a bit. Who were Linda and Paul? Well, the episode describes Linda as this fun-loving, successful woman. She loved fashion, she had a great career, just a real go-getter. And then there's Paul, much younger. Not what you'd call a looker. But he always claimed to be, get this, a genius.
And playing up that genius angle, that's a classic tactic for manipulators. It's about creating this aura of superiority, almost like they're above suspicion.
Right, because who's going to question a genius, right?
Yeah.
But there's a difference between being brilliant and, well, just being arrogant. And some of Paul's colleagues even called him out for being, well, a little too smart for his own good, almost like a warning sign in hindsight.
Totally. Arrogance can be a mask for insecurity and a need to control everything and everyone. If you think you're the smartest one in the room, you might feel like it's okay to manipulate others to get what you want.
And then there's the whole whirlwind romance thing. 3 years of dating, and then bam, Vegas wedding. I don't know about you, but that would set off some alarm bells for me.
Yeah, rushing into commitment, that's textbook manipulation. Overwhelm the victim, don't give them time to think straight, and those red flags, they just blend right in.
And speaking of red flags, there was a big one right from the start. Like a month into the marriage, Paul wants Linda to get this massive life insurance policy, $1 million.
Whoa.
Yeah, on herself, of course, with him, naturally, as the beneficiary.
Ooh, that's like the biggest red flag in the book. It practically screams financial motive. And it gets even worse when you find out, which the episode tells us, Paul was secretly supporting 2 ex-wives and 3 kids. The guy had some serious baggage.
You got to wonder, did Linda have any suspicions at all? I mean, the episode mentions she had some worries about Paul's behavior, but she was so in love. She just couldn't believe he would actually hurt her.
That's denial for you. It's powerful stuff, especially when love is involved. We create these stories about the people we love, and when reality doesn't fit that story, we do some mental gymnastics to make it work. It's easier to believe the lie than to face the possibility that we've been totally wrong about someone.
So basically, love can actually blind you to the truth.
Sadly, yeah, sometimes.
Well, in July of '93, reality hit Linda hard. She got super sick, like violently ill, spent 21 days in the hospital, and the doctors, they were baffled.
And this is where a little detail turns into a big, scary clue. You remember Nurse Bundy? She noticed something weird about Linda's vibe bag. It was cloudy. Seemed off.
Oh, wow.
Right. Well, they test it, and guess what? Lidocaine. That's a powerful anesthetic. Someone had tampered with the IV bag. Suddenly, it wasn't just a mystery illness anymore. It was potential foul play, and all eyes turned to Paul.
Yeah, that's creepy.
It is. The episode even plays this audio clip of Linda in the hospital, and she actually tells the police that Paul is the only one who would have a reason to do this to her. So even though she suspects him, you can still hear that love and denial in her voice.
Wow. So she had her doubts, but still. Talk about a messed up situation.
It really is. To be torn between your heart and your head like that, wanting to believe the best about someone, but seeing all these signs pointing in the opposite direction.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. So, okay, the seeds of doubt are planted, but what happens next? Does Linda finally confront Paul? Does she start to see him for who he really is?
Well, that's a story for part 2. And trust me, things are about to get a whole lot more complicated and a whole lot darker.
So Linda's in the hospital, someone messed with her 5E, and everyone's looking at Paul. You'd think she'd finally wake up and smell the coffee, right?
You'd think, but as we see in the episode, denial is a powerful force, especially when you're in love and terrified of facing the truth about someone you care about. Linda basically built up this mental wall to protect herself from the reality of what was happening.
And get this, just a few months later, in December '93, it happens again. Another mysterious illness, back in the hospital. And yeah, you guessed it, another tampered IV bag. But this time the hospital staff wasn't messing around. They put up a sign on Linda's door, like straight up saying Paul couldn't be alone with her. Pretty clear message, right?
Oh yeah, that was a huge red flag. The medical staff were picking up on what was happening, and they were trying to protect Linda, even if she couldn't protect herself.
Yeah, everyone around her could see it.
Mm-hmm.
But she was trapped in this bubble of denial. It's actually around this time that Linda's friend, Mary, finds those life insurance papers and confronts her. Ugh, can you imagine having that conversation, trying to convince your friend that the person they love might be trying to kill them?
That must have been so hard for Mary, to care about her friends so much but feel helpless to get through to her. And that's something we see a lot with loved ones in these situations, you know. They can see the danger so clearly, but the victim just pushes back, refuses to accept it.
It's heartbreaking, really. And sadly for Linda, her denial was, well, fatal. June 9th, 1994. Paul calls 911, says Linda's unresponsive. They rush her to the hospital, but it's too late.
It's chilling, the way the episode portrays it. Nurse Bundy, when she hears about Linda's death, she says, "He finally did it. Someone really dropped the ball." Like, even though they suspected it, there was still this sense of, like, failure that they couldn't prevent it.
Yeah. And the autopsy. The cause of death was nicotine poisoning.
Oh.
We're not talking about, like, a smoker's levels. This was massive, way beyond anything you'd expect.
Right, and this is where the testimony of Dr. Benowitz is crucial. He's a leading expert on nicotine, and he basically says, point blank, that the levels in Linda's body were not only lethal, they were practically unheard of. So with the whole tampered 5e thing in the past, you know, it just raises all sorts of red flags.
And then they find this puncture mark behind Linda's ear, which makes them think maybe it was an injection.
Exactly. That really points to something more deliberate, planned out. It wasn't an accident.
So they suspect Paul, but there's no hard proof. No smoking gun, so to speak.
Yeah.
So he's a free man. And what does he do? He tries to claim Linda's entire estate.
Yeah, talk about adding insult to injury. But there's a twist. Linda had actually handwritten a note leaving half her estate to her sister. The episode shows Paul's reaction when this note comes out, and let me tell you, the guy was not happy.
Yeah, like he just couldn't believe someone outsmarted them. But even with that, he still gets almost $500,000.
Not bad for, well, allegedly murdering your wife.
And the episode goes on to show how more and more of Paul's lies unraveled. His genius act, his big Jeopardy wins, totally made up.
The guy was a master manipulator, built his whole life on these elaborate lies.
Thankfully, though, the case didn't just go cold. This Sergeant Shaw, he inherits the case, and he becomes obsessed with those audio recordings that Linda made. You know, the ones where she documented all of Paul's shady behavior?
Yeah, those recordings were a game changer. Sergeant Shaw spent like 4 years piecing everything together, using Linda's own words to build the case against Paul. It's kind of amazing, you know? Even in death, Linda was fighting to expose the truth.
It's incredible. And then there's this moment, like a light bulb going off, when Dr. Benowitz suddenly remembers something crucial. He tells the investigators that death from that level of nicotine would have been super fast, like almost instant.
And that's huge because it narrows down the time frame of Linda's death to when Paul was the only one with her. It makes him the only suspect.
So the cops come up with this plan, this clever little scheme to get Paul talking. They bring him in for questioning, but they make it seem like it's just a casual chat with some local cops from Kansas, not the actual detectives working the case in Orange County.
It was genius, really. They played right into his arrogance, his belief that he was smarter than everyone else. He walked right into their trap.
And his arrogance is on full display in the episode. When they tell him he's under arrest for Linda's murder, his biggest concern is missing his 4 o'clock meeting. Can you believe that?
I know. It's almost like a scene from a movie. The guy shows absolutely zero remorse, no concern for his dead wife, just worried about his schedule.
So it's finally happening. Paul Curry, the self-proclaimed genius, is going on trial for the murder of his wife, Linda. What happens next? Does he manage to pull off another deception? Or does justice finally prevail?
Well, you'll have to wait for part 3 to find out. But let me just say, the trial is a wild ride, full of twists, shocking reveals, and a final verdict that, well, you'll just have to hear it to believe it.
All right, so the trial's underway. You'd think it would be a slam dunk, right? I mean, with all the evidence stacked against Paul.
Well, the episode actually shows how tough it was for the prosecution. Yeah, they had a ton of circumstantial evidence, you know, the IV bags, the timing of Linda's death, that life insurance policy. But the thing is, they didn't have a direct connection between Paul and the nicotine.
So what did the defense argue then?
Okay, so get this. They went with this totally bizarre strategy, what they called the enema defense.
The enema defense. What is that?
It was this idea that maybe, just maybe, Linda was giving herself nicotine enemas and that she somehow accidentally overdosed.
Wait, nicotine enemas? Is that even a real thing?
I know, right? Sounds crazy, but they were trying to say that maybe Linda was into some kind of home remedy, some alternative medicine thing.
Oh, come on. That's ridiculous.
It was a long shot, that's for sure. And of course, the prosecution was like, nope, not buying it. I mean, who would do that? Especially with Linda's history of those mysterious illnesses.
Yeah, totally grasping at straws. But even without that direct link to the nicotine, the prosecution had a secret weapon, and that was Paul himself.
Right. Those recordings Linda made, they were pure gold for the prosecution.
Uh-huh.
They showed Paul's true colors,
Yeah.
all the manipulation, the lies, the fact that he was in it for the money. It let the jury see past that charming act he put on and see who he really was.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's that recording of Paul talking to his new wife after he got arrested. The one where he's freaking out, but not about Linda dying, but about whether they could actually prove he did it.
Yeah, talk about incriminating. It showed just how cold and calculating he really was, just totally busted that whole grieving husband image he was trying to sell.
So after all these years, Linda's family and friends, they finally had their day in court. What happened? What was the verdict?
Well, the jury deliberated for a while, and then, bam, they found Paul guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder.
Wow. I bet that was a huge relief for everyone who loved Linda.
Definitely a bittersweet victory, though, right? I mean, justice was served, but it obviously doesn't bring Linda back.
It makes you think, about the signs we might miss, or maybe just choose to ignore, and how we can protect ourselves from falling into those traps.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole story just shows that manipulation, it can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how smart you are or what your background is.
Yeah, it's scary.
It is. But I think the most important thing to remember is to trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. And if you're worried about someone, don't be afraid to speak up. You might just save their life.
That's such good advice. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the curious case of Paul Curry. It's been a wild ride, that's for sure.
It has.
A story of love, betrayal, and ultimately justice. Hopefully, by understanding these kinds of cases, we can all learn to spot the red flags and protect ourselves and those we love from becoming the next victim.